Now, it's my pleasure to invite to the podium Clemens Breisinger, our first speaker.
All right, thanks Dean Rabi, our teams, Rachel, Sibel, also Fatma from IFPRI. Thank you so much for organizing this. Thank you all for coming. It's really a pleasure for me. Whenever I enter this campus, I feel something special. I feel like a good spirit. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here. And let me also convey our best greetings to all of you from our Director General, Schengen Fan. He's really looking forward to continue the very successful collaboration with this faculty and this university going forward. Now, it's my pleasure to discuss with you IFPRI's Global Food Policy Report. This is IFPRI's annual flagship report. It's the 7th edition this year. The idea of the report is to cover key developments in food security, nutrition, food policy in previous years and give an outlook to what we may be expecting in the coming years. Also, each year we have a specific focus of this report, and this year the focus is on globalization. So, as we all know, and as many of our and other people's research has shown, globalization has really helped to reduce poverty and food insecurity globally at varying degrees, but especially if we look at countries in Asia and China specifically, it's amazing how many million people got pulled out of poverty that is related to globalization, increasing trade, etc. But also other parts of the world have benefited. And overall, over the last decades, we have seen at the global level and in many countries a decline in poverty and a decline in hunger and food insecurity. So one of the key messages here is that if globalization is managed well, then it can really help. But recently we have seen anti-globalization is on the rise. And we witness this in many parts of the world. Brexit is one example. US administration, many countries in Europe. There is a stark sentiment among the people that maybe globalization is not the best thing to do. And maybe we have to be looking more at the country level again. So in this talk, I'm going to kind of defend globalization, but also acknowledging that we may have to do better in the future and fix some of the shortcomings that come with globalization. Now, why is anti-globalization on the rise? I mean, there may be many reasons, and there can also be country-specific, but just a few key words here. I mean, the global food, oil, and financial crisis really left a lot of countries with big problems, and they are still felt in many countries if you look at Southern Europe and other places. So a lot of countries are still struggling with the aftermath of this crisis. Also, in other parts of the world, like here, a lot of research shows that like food insecurity and other things have actually contributed to revolutions that have then led to conflicts. And so those conflicts, if we look at countries like Yemen and Syria, have really contributed to a global rise in hunger levels. So for the first time in many years, global hunger is on the rise again. And of course, a big issue is that despite things are getting better in some countries globally, inequality has been rising. And there is a sense that inequality may contribute, to this general sentiment of anti-globalization. So basically what we can say is there's a lot of uncertainty also that's increasing. Things that we have counted on in the past seem to be no longer true. Some countries are dramatically changing their their policies, and that affects the whole world. So there's a generally rising uncertainty. So what does globalization, the impacts that I just described, have to do with the global food system? So there are a couple of channels which we think are critical. So the first one obviously is trade. Food trade is a big topic in this part of the world. As you know, it plays a big role on the import side, but also on the export side. So the question is, this increasing protectionism and the rhetoric, but not only the rhetoric, but the actions that are taking place these days, how are they impacting the global food system? Then also investments. I mean, there are a lot of global players, but also local investors in the food system, from farm to fork. If you think of inputs to the processing food industry, what do these threats to investment, what may they mean for global food system? Also tightening borders. A lot of countries are starting to tightening border controls, limiting the free movement or the movement, depending on the region, of people. What does that mean? Also knowledge and data flow restrictions, policy reform at the country level, not only in developing countries, but as you know, the US and Europe and other places have very specific farm policies, and they affect the rest of the world. And also global governance. So there is a trend of weakening global institutions at the time where they may be needed the most. What may this mean? So in the following, I'll just highlight a few points for each of those that I just mentioned. And then I'm hoping for a very lively discussion on each of those. And obviously, those points also reflect the chapters in the Global Food Policy Report that you may have hopefully picked up. If not, it's also online. So please go back there. It's a very rich discussion. It's distinguished researchers that give their showcase their research on each of these points. Now, the free flow of goods. Why do we think this is important and actually key for food security and nutrition? The open trade can actually contribute to food security, especially in countries that may not have the means to produce everything locally, but not only there. No, there are a lot of very cold countries where it's really expensive and not even feasible to grow vegetables and fruits. So the exchange of food across borders, some countries have better climate to grow wheat, other countries have better climate to grow apples. This global exchange is good for two reasons. Number one, there is a price stabilization mechanism. Remember the early days where, because of a failed crop in one country, bad weather or a drought or something, there was a famine. Now, if we have a global food system, it's unlikely that there is a drought in the whole world. So keeping food moving across borders is important for that reason. It's also important for improving nutrition. In the old days in Europe, we ate potatoes and potatoes and potatoes at a certain point in the year and throughout the winter. But nowadays you see the shelves full of more diversified food, and that's clearly important for health and nutrition. Now, what we think is critical is promote a fair international trading system, and you can read much more what we mean by fair, and we can also discuss this later. Next point is international investment can benefit local food security. When I say can benefit, means it doesn't have to. But it can play a key role in eliminating hunger. There are a lot of good examples, research done by IFPRI, FAO, and the World Bank highlighted in this chapter a couple of really good examples on how international investment in agriculture has increased food production, value chains, and also developed infrastructure. And also agribusiness investments can help, not only for increasing production, but also to create jobs, also to transfer technology, learning by doing. So the key recommendation of that chapter is to promote public-private partnerships for agro-infrastructure development in inclusive business models. Now, international migration, and again, this is a global perspective. I know the country we are in right now has its very specific migration and refugee story. So here we are more talking about international migration, and there's a lot of evidence how migration can help not only the receiving countries, but also the sending countries, where remittances and knowledge transfer of the migrants can really help. And again, Lebanon, I think, is probably one of the countries who has more people outside of the country than inside. And I think we can all see in this country how the country can benefit from people who are outside. They may come back from time to time, or they may come back. So there's a lot of transfers going on. And there's a case study about Bangladesh to show this relationship, how migration can help. Also, this chapter makes the case that refugees, and again, this may be one of the points, especially in Europe, which contributes to the anti-globalization kind of sentiments. The integration of refugees, hosting of refugees can be very challenging, but there is some research shown in this chapter that shows that also local communities, if things are managed well, can actually benefit from hosting refugees. Next point, very important in our view, obviously, is open access to knowledge and data. There are huge opportunities with big data out there. Again, there's a lot of sentiment that there are issues with big data and privacy, etc. But if such data is managed well, then it can really help the decision making and improve food system from farm to consumers. Just imagine a farmer has access on his mobile phone, for example, to reliable weather forecasts or market prices, or the consumers, by that matter, are able to better track the nutrients, for example, of specific foods. So there are numerous and many applications and examples that we can think of how knowledge and data can improve food and nutrition security on the production as well as on the consumption side. So the recommendation is to build open data initiatives and really enhance knowledge and empower citizens through capacity building. That's another thing that we notice. No, I mean, in many countries, there is a lot of information out there, but a lot of people find it hard to, distinguish between what is fake news and what is evidence-based kind of news. And so this can also create all kind of misunderstandings. So empowering citizens, how to use the wealth of information that's out there well, is very important. Also domestic farm policy. From my point of view, I mean, many, let's say, development people from Europe and the US like to tell other countries like what to do in terms of farm policy. But sometimes it's good to start also at home. And so there's a lot of policies in the EU and the US who have big implications for developing and emerging countries. There have been some improvements in terms of distortion and the producer support in those regions, as you can see. So things have improved a bit, but things have also stalled. And so in terms of domestic farm policy reform, a lot of progress still needs to be made. And again, multinational agreements can be superior to bilateral deals. Okay, so how can we promote a new era of globalization? What do I mean by new era? The previous era, if you want, has improved food security. It has reduced poverty, but it also contributed to increasing inequality. So what can be done better so that globalization benefits everyone and not just some people? So the first point that's important is to encourage an open, efficient, and fair trading system. Also, rural development to break the vicious cycle of conflict, food insecurity, and migration should be on top of the agenda. Also, more investment in research and innovation is needed. We need to enhance the evidence-based policy making. As we know, in many of our countries, there is a de-link between research and policy making. So how can we bridge that gap and make sure that policies are more evidence-based? Also, cooperation and mutual learning, I think, is something to emphasize, especially in these days, again, where a lot of people may prefer to go back to their little room. I think we really need to enhance cooperation and dialogue. And then also, and that's kind of ending on a positive note, there are a lot of new opportunities that come especially with new technologies. And so let's harness them and foster them in order to promote an integrated world that keeps going back on track to eradicate hunger and poverty globally. So with this, I would like to end this presentation. I'm sure there will be a very lively discussion. Now Nadim is next. He will be talking about the MENA region specifically and the findings from the MENA regional chapter. Thank you very much.